Follow the rules, Aaron. Do it now.
Get off their drawings. Not one more step.
Your children violated community standards, Gail Thornton snapped, her heel grinding into the chalk drawing my daughter made that morning. Smoke-colored irritation tightened her face as she shoved a notice toward my chest like it was a warrant. If you can't control them, the board will. I stared at her, heartbeat drumming harder than the cicadas buzzing through Willow Ridge. You're stepping over a line you can't handle, I told the board chair, voice low enough to make her blink. Her expression faltered, just for a beat, before she smoothed it back into the polished HOA hardness. But you already knew that, didn't you? I added. I built the missing persons grid this county still uses. Her fingers twitched. That was my stop-scroll reversal, a warning shot. And if you've ever felt that jolt, the moment a bully realizes you're the wrong person to pick on, stay right here and hit the subscribe button now. This is about to turn into the kind of fight you don't walk away from. I'm Aaron Wolf, I said sharply. Search and rescue, 15 years. I've found people in mountains, deserts, and flood zones. You really think I won't know when something's off in my own yard? The clipboard queen opened her mouth, closed it again, then lifted her chin like she was balancing her authority on it. But the moment she stepped onto my driveway was the moment every wound I'd been holding closed tore open. Our kids, the only pieces of my wife I still got to protect, had spent the morning drawing suns and castles in chalk. My youngest had given me a heart with the words, "Dad's safe." The last time their mother spoke to me before she passed, she'd whispered a promise into my ear. Keep them whole. Whatever happens, keep them whole. So, when the tyrant in heels scuffed away the chalk with that deliberate sweep, when she called my children a community disruption, it hit with a force I wasn't prepared for. Not because it was an HOA violation, but because it stabbed straight into the promise I'd sworn on a hospital floor 2 years ago. I crouched, brushing away the remaining dust of the heart my daughter made, while the enforcer in crimson kept lecturing me about bylaws. But behind the regulation tone, something colder slithered. Possession, claiming space, claiming control, claiming authority over what was mine. You failed to attend the meeting regarding unsupervised minors, she continued. 3 children wandering the neighborhood unsupervised is a liability. And the HOA can take steps. What steps? I asked. Her smile sharpened. Steps you won't enjoy. I looked up at her shoes, those sharp, polished weapons she used to punctuate every threat. And the truth snapped through me like a wire pulled too tight. She wasn't here about chalk or curfews. She was here because she hated what she couldn't control. My kids were joyful, loud, healing, alive, and I hadn't bowed to her once. Her voice became a drone, buzzing like a loose electrical line. This community thrives on order, Mr. Wolf, and when homeowners fail to comply... Where are you watching from? I muttered toward the invisible audience my mind imagined hovering over my shoulder. The people who'd understand exactly how this kind of abuse starts. I stood slowly, brushing chalk from my hands. You're done threatening my family. The officer of rules blinked at the shift in my tone, but before she could fire back, the sound of a door slamming from the direction of the HOA office carried across the cul-de-sac, sharp, metallic, out of place. It made the hair rise on the back of my neck. Expect further action, she hissed, stepping back like she'd accomplished something. But as she left, I noticed something that killed the air in my lungs. The chalk drawings weren't the only things missing. My kids' bikes, always stacked by the porch, were gone. And the yard was too quiet. The silence hit harder than any violation notice. A minute earlier, I'd been staring down Gail Thornton on my driveway. Now I was staring at empty concrete where 3 bikes should have been lined up. No helmets, no sneakers kicked off nearby, no shrieks from my youngest. Emma, I called, turning toward the front door. Noah, Grace, nothing. A breeze moved across the yard, lifting leftover chalk crumbs and the mark of that erased heart. The board chair had marched off with her clipboard like she'd won something, but the farther she got from my property, the more wrong the air felt. It wasn't quiet, it was vacant. I pushed into the house, the familiar squeak of the hinge sounding foreign. The living room was exactly how we'd left it. Blankets on the couch, a backpack half unzipped, a cartoon still paused on the TV. No snacks out, no spilled juice, no sibling argument mid-scene, just absence. Kids, this isn't funny, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. Training kicked in out of habit. Scan, assess, categorize. Front room empty, kitchen clear, back hallway, bedrooms, bathroom, no sign of them. No doors ajar, no open windows, no muddy footprints trailing in. I checked the clock over the stove. They'd been outside when Gail Thornton arrived, drawing, laughing, racing circles around each other. I'd watched them. I knew how long it had been. Not long enough for 3 children to vanish on their own. Something hot and thin slid under my ribs. On the fridge, their chore chart hung crooked. Emma's neat handwriting, Noah's messy stars, Grace's crooked smiley faces. 3 columns, 3 lives I'd sworn to keep track of better than any case file. I'd lost people in the field before, but never my own. Out the window, I saw movement across the cul-de-sac. Curtains twitched in 2 houses. The enforcer in crimson hadn't just delivered a notice. She'd delivered a show, and people had watched. I stepped back outside, phone in my hand, but not dialing yet. Not until I had something solid to report. I walked the side yard, checked the gate, still latched. No bikes dumped behind the hedges, no chalk trail leading away. Just tire marks that had left in more of a hurry than my kids ever moved. Across the street, Mrs. Langley stood on her porch, arms wrapped tight around herself. She looked like she wanted to melt into the siding. "When's the last time you saw them?" I asked, crossing over. She flinched at my tone, then swallowed. "They were on the driveway when the clipboard queen pulled up," she said. "I heard her talking to you, went inside to turn off the stove for a second. When I came back, they were gone, and she was walking away like nothing happened." The tyrant in heels had been the last adult near my kids. The realization settled with a cold, heavy finality. "Did you see anyone else?" I pressed. "Any cars, delivery trucks, friends?" She shook her head. "Just her," she said softly. "And a white SUV I didn't recognize parked by the HOA office earlier. It was gone by the time I came back out." There it was, the first thread. Inside my chest, something clicked into a different gear. This was no longer about chalk drawings or petty harassment. The officer of rules had become the common denominator between my missing children and an unaccounted-for vehicle in a place where every car looked the same. I stepped back, anger cooling into the kind of focus I only felt during active searches. My mind mapped routes, time windows, potential witnesses, camera angles. Willow Ridge wasn't a wilderness, but tonight it was the most dangerous terrain I'd ever worked, and every second mattered now. The clipboard queen thought she was playing neighborhood politics. She had no idea she'd just turned my home into an active investigation. I didn't waste time standing in the cul-de-sac, hoping my kids would just reappear. Hope didn't bring anyone back. I switched into search mode, the part of my brain that didn't care who the neighbor was or how pretty the lawns looked, only about timelines and terrain. Willow Ridge was a gated community. That meant one thing in my favor: cameras. If 3 children and 3 missing bikes had moved through any common area in the last half hour, there was a good chance a lens had caught them. The HOA office sat near the entrance, dressed up to look like a cottage so people would forget it was where the board kept its teeth. I walked straight toward it, pulse pounding. Lights were on inside. When I opened the glass door, the smell of cleaner and toner hit me. Behind the front counter, a familiar figure froze. Mason Adler. He was the maintenance guy, the camera tech here. Right now he looked like a man caught between 2 exits. One hand rested on a stack of folders, the other hovered over a keyboard, like he didn't know whether to log in or shut everything down. "Aaron," he said, voice thin, "we're, closed for the day." I stepped up to the counter. "My kids are missing," I said bluntly. "Last seen on my driveway while the clipboard queen was scraping their drawings off the concrete. I need footage from every camera between my house and this gate." His eyes widened, then they flicked sideways, past my shoulder, toward the doorway that led deeper into the office. His fingers tapped an anxious rhythm against the desk. From the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of crimson fabric disappearing down that hall. The enforcer in crimson was still here. "You know there are procedures," he murmured. "Requests have to go through the board chair. She can authorize a review." "Yeah," I said. "I noticed how helpful she's been." Mason's throat worked. He shifted his weight, sneakers squeaking on the tile. His gaze kept jumping to the security monitor mounted behind him, where a grid of camera feeds cycled. The grid flickered through familiar corners of the neighborhood. On one screen, 3 empty bike racks lined up under a streetlight. I leaned in slightly. "You saw something," I said quietly. "Or you wouldn't look like you're about to climb out of your own skin." He flinched. His hand darted to the mouse, then froze halfway. His shoulders hunched, pulling in on themselves. "The officer of rules told us not to get involved," he said, eyes fixed over my head. "Said it was a disciplinary matter between a homeowner and the board." My jaw tightened. "Disciplinary," I repeated. "Mason, I'm asking you as a father, not as your neighbor. 3 children, gone. Every minute you stall is another mile they can be moved." Sweat beaded along his hairline. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist, gaze finally dropping to meet mine. For a second, the struggle inside him was plain. Fear of the tyrant in heels on one side, the weight of what he knew on the other. "I shouldn't," he whispered. "But you will," I said, not a threat. A quiet prediction. Something in him sagged, his shoulders lowered, like he'd been carrying a load that finally slipped. He reached behind him, grabbed the key ring on a hook, and fumbled until he found the one that opened the side door to the security room. 5 minutes, he muttered. "If she asks, you were never here." His hand shook so badly the key scraped the metal twice before the lock turned. That tremor, that tiny flinch at every sound in the office, told me everything about the grip Gale Thornton had on him, and it told me he was finally, painfully, starting to loosen it. The security room was colder than the hallway, lit by the bluish wash of monitors and the soft hum of equipment. Mason closed the door behind us, the latch clicking like a countdown starting. Rows of screens showed every angle of Willow Ridge, gates, sidewalks, the pool, the playground, the cul-de-sacs. "Which one picks up my street?" I asked. He swallowed, then pointed to the upper left feed. "That cluster. I haven't deleted anything." The way he said it told me someone had wanted him to. "Roll it back 15 minutes, I said. His fingers trembled on the mouse as he scrubbed the timeline back. My driveway appeared on screen, familiar and wrong at the same time. There were my kids earlier, chalk dust on their knees, bikes leaning on the porch rail. A few seconds later, the enforcer in crimson strode into frame, heels flashing, clipboard under one arm like a weapon. The audio was off, but I didn't need it. I watched myself at the edge of the frame, arms folded, jaw clenched, while the board chair gestured toward the kids with that exaggerated, performative disdain. She stepped right on my youngest drawing. The clipboard queen handed me the notice like she was serving a sentence. Then came the part I hadn't seen. While I was turned toward her, arguing, a white SUV eased into view at the far end of the street. No markings, slow, too slow. It lingered behind a parked car, partially obscured, but not enough to hide the open back passenger door. My kids didn't bolt for it. That would have been easier to accept. Instead, the vehicle idled while a figure climbed out from the driver's side and waved them over with a familiarity that made my stomach knot. Small shapes moved, 3 helmets, 3 backpacks thrown on in a hurry. "Stop," I said. Mason froze the frame. Even at a bad resolution, I recognized the dark blazer, the swing of hair, the set of those shoulders. The tyrant in heels had walked away from me mid-lecture, circled behind the SUV, and opened the rear door wider. My children hesitated, glancing back toward where I stood. Then she leaned toward them, lips moving in what looked like reassurance or a warning. They climbed in. She shut the door. The officer of rules walked back toward my driveway like nothing had happened. I felt my heartbeat in my teeth. "You saw this and you didn't call anyone?" I asked quietly. Mason's face crumpled. "She said it was an authorized escort," he whispered. "Said you'd been uncooperative with behavioral recommendations, and that the board had arranged temporary supervision with a partner program." He dragged a hand through his hair. I knew it sounded wrong, but she threatened to fire me if I questioned her again. The words barely landed before the doorknob rattled. "What's taking so long, Mason?" came a sharp voice from the hall. The clipboard queen. He jumped like he'd been burned, frantically minimizing windows just as the door swung open. Gale Thornton stood there, framed by the fluorescent light, lips pressed into a thin line. "We're closed," she said, eyes sliding to me. "This area is for authorized personnel only." "Good thing I'm authorized to open a criminal," Case, I replied. She laughed, too loud, too bright. Over a noise complaint? The board chair scoffed. You're being dramatic, Mr. Wolf. You and your children needed structure. I arranged it. By putting them in a stranger's SUV? I stepped forward, feeling that old field calm steel my spine. You facilitated an unauthorized removal of 3 minors without parental consent. That's not structure. That's abduction. The tyrant in heels flicked a glance at the monitors, then back at Mason. Turn those off, she ordered. HOA security footage is confidential. He didn't move. Mason, she repeated, voice icy. Now. His hand hovered over the keyboard and stayed there, fingers frozen, sweat beaded at his temple. In that tiny hesitation, I saw the internal war tearing him apart. You're not wiping anything, I said. I've seen enough, so has he. And if either of you destroys a single frame, I'll make sure the DA calls it evidence tampering. For the first time, real fear passed through her eyes. It was gone in a flash, replaced by manufactured indignation. You're unstable, she snapped. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Officer Review Board, threatening volunteers, harassing staff. Go ahead, I cut in. But first, you can explain to the sheriff why the last place my kids were seen was on your cameras, leaving in a vehicle you helped load. She stepped back, jaw tight, composure cracking at the edges. In that cramped room, with the glow of the paused video reflecting off the walls, the stakes stopped being theoretical. I wasn't dealing with petty fines anymore. I was staring at a woman who thought her role gave her the right to move my children like pieces on a board, and I knew exactly which outside agencies I was calling next. I walked out of the security room as the floor tilted under my boots. Seeing my kids climb into that SUV under Gail Thornton's watch was one thing. Watching her stroll in afterward, like the officer of rules instead of an accomplice, shoved this into a different category entirely. Mason followed me into the hallway, wiping his palms on his jeans. She's going to fire me, he muttered. She might try, I said. But once this is a felony case, nobody's going to care about her tantrums. Behind us, the board chair's voice cracked through the corridor. This conversation is over, she announced. You've harassed my staff and accessed confidential recordings without authorization. I turned to face the enforcer in crimson in the doorway. You handed my children to a stranger and watched them leave this neighborhood, I said. We're way past worrying about your confidentiality. They're with a licensed behavioral consultant, the clipboard queen insisted. You refused corrective directives. As HOA president, I exercise discretionary authority to ensure their welfare. You don't have discretionary authority over my kids, I replied. You're not family. You're not law enforcement. You're a woman with a clipboard and a power addiction. The tyrant in heels looked like she might throw that clipboard at my head. Instead, she inhaled sharply. You left them unsupervised, she said. That's neglect. We intervened. You just admitted you orchestrated their removal, I answered. Thanks for putting that on record. I walked out before she could try another spin. I'd watched suspects talk themselves into deeper charges to know when to stop listening. Let her keep explaining later. Under oath. Outside, the heat hit like an oven. For the first time since I saw the empty driveway, my hands shook. Not from fear, from the urge to sprint in every direction at once. Instead, I did what I drilled into rookies on chaotic scenes. Step back, breathe, call it in. I sat in my truck, shut the door, and dialed the sheriff's direct line. Years of search and rescue earned me numbers that skipped the front desk. Sheriff's Office, Daniels, came the voice. It's Wolf, I said. 3 kids removed from a gated community by a non-custodial adult with no court order and HOA involvement. I have video of the transfer and a cooperative witness. The pause was short. Give me the timeline, he said, voice flattening into business. I did. Kids on the driveway, Gail Thornton arriving, the SUV easing in, my children climbing in while the officer of rules held the door, her bogus behavioral supervision claim, Mason's fear of crossing her. I kept it clinical. Times, locations, what I'd personally seen. All right, Daniels said. This fits an active child abduction response. Stay put. I'm sending 1 unit to you and 1 to her. Do not confront the HOA president again. Understood? I understand, I said. You'll want that footage preserved. The enforcer in crimson already tried to bully the tech into killing the feed. We'll get a preservation order to their management company, he replied. And Wolf? Yeah. You're not on this case. You're the reporting victim. Let us handle it. It stung, but it was what I needed. Outside authority, chain of custody, no hint I'd use my badge to settle a score. I hung up and texted Mason. Deputies en route. Don't touch anything. You're a witness now. Minutes later, a cruiser rolled through the gate, lights off. Blinds twitched, doors cracked. In Willow Ridge, gossip moved fast. The sight of a patrol car at the HOA office moved faster. A deputy stepped out and walked toward the door I'd left. I watched from my truck, heat shimmering the pavement. For the first time since my children vanished, the balance tipped, even slightly. The clipboard queen had treated this subdivision like her private kingdom for years. Now the kingdom had visitors who didn't answer to her. The deputy's knock on, the HOA office door still echoed in my mind as I pulled into my driveway. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He'd taken my statement, secured the footage, and driven straight to question Gail Thornton. But the tightness in his jaw told me she hadn't cracked. The board chair was slippery, calculating, and more dangerous now that she knew law enforcement was involved. My house felt wrong when I stepped inside. Too quiet, too still. The absence of my kids' voices rattled through the halls like a haunting. I stood in the entryway, gripping the doorknob until my knuckles ached. I'd seen hundreds of panicked parents in my years responding to Amber Alerts. Now I understood the animal-level terror they never had words for. I moved toward the living room, trying to breathe through the pressure in my ribs. I stopped when I saw it, 3 cereal bowls on the coffee table, still half full. The smallest one had those little rainbow marshmallows floating on top. That one belonged to Olivia. Everything inside me twisted. Before I could pull myself together, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Wolf, a shaky voice whispered. She's lying to them. My pulse kicked. Who is this? It's Jenna, the voice stammered, Mason's wife, the HOA receptionist who always kept her head down when the officer of rules walked by. She never called anyone. What do you know? I asked. I shouldn't even have my phone, she whispered. But I heard her talking after you left. She said she neutralized the threat before he could escalate. I think she meant you, and she said the kids needed to be kept off-site until the narrative settled. My stomach dropped. Off-site where? I don't know. I swear I don't. But the clipboard queen told Mason not to come in tomorrow. That never happens unless she's covering something. Of course she was. The enforcer in Crimson didn't kidnap 3 children because she panicked. She did it because she had a plan. A plan she still thought she could execute. Jenna, I said, lowering my voice, listen to me. You need to get somewhere safe, somewhere she can't intimidate you. I can't leave, she said. Marla, her breath hitched. She's in the lobby right now. She's pacing. I think she knows I made this call. The line cut. A cold spike ran down my spine. The tyrant in heels was spiraling, and spiraling people made reckless decisions. I stepped into the kitchen, grabbed a notepad, and started writing everything Jenna said, time-stamped, evidence, chain of events, anything that could tighten the net around the board chair. My phone buzzed again, this time from Sheriff Daniels. We found the SUV, he said without preamble. Abandoned behind the Green Lawn storage facility. No signs of the kids. Every muscle locked. We've got K9 units sweeping the area, he said. We also subpoenaed Thornton's email and work communications. But Wolf, she's already lawyering up. Of course she was. I need access to the HOA's server, I said. Their internal scheduling software, contractor logs, vendor directory, everything she'd used to hide them. You're not in this investigation, Daniels reminded me. I'll see what I can get you through official channels, but don't insert yourself. Insert myself? My children were somewhere unknown, with a woman who viewed people as assets or obstacles. I wasn't inserting myself. I was saving them. After he hung up, I stared at the wall, replaying Jenna's words, kept off-site until the narrative settled. That meant no accident, no spontaneous abduction. It was orchestrated, and orchestrations needed logistics. Only one person in Willow Ridge handled logistics, the clipboard queen herself. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The next lead wasn't here. It was at a place seniors in the neighborhood kept mentioning, the clubhouse where Gail Thornton held board meetings, vendor interviews, and closed-door compliance consultations. If she stashed anything, plans, schedules, hidden contractors, it would be tied to that building. A storm rolled across the horizon as I drove. Lightning flashed above the tree line, slicing the sky open. It matched the feeling boiling inside me. The officer of rules thought she controlled this community. She had no idea what happened when a father and a trained investigator stopped playing by her script. By the time I reached the clubhouse, the storm was pounding Willow Ridge so hard the parking lot looked like a shallow lake. The building glowed at the cul-de-sac's end, fake stone and white trim pretending to matter. This was where Gail Thornton held court, where the board chair turned signatures into control. I parked off to the side and watched the door. No SUV, no flash of the enforcer in crimson. Either she was gone or she felt untouchable. The door was unlocked. The officer of rules always believed locks were for other people. Folded chairs faced the little podium where the clipboard queen lectured. Tonight, it sat empty. I followed the faint hum of equipment down a side hallway lined with framed community event photos. A strip of blue light leaked from a half-open door. Mason sat in the cramped server room, hunched in front of a monitor and a short rack of hardware. His shoulders rounded inward, his hands twisted together in his lap. He flinched when he saw me. "You can't be in here," he said, eyes flicking to a small interior camera blinking red in the corner. "Neither can my kids be missing," I answered. His gaze dropped. His knee bounced until the chair squeaked. "She said you'd come," he muttered. "Said you were unstable, that the board had to protect the neighborhood." The tyrant in heels had always used protect as a synonym for obey. I shut the door and stayed near it. "You already helped me once," I said. "You wouldn't have if you thought this was fine." He rubbed his palms on his jeans. "It isn't," he whispered. "Hasn't been for a long time." "Then start there." He stared past me at the racks. "Months ago, Gail Thornton had me clean gate logs," he said. "Certain plates, certain times. She'd hand me lists, wanted them erased from the official reports. Called it sensitive board business." "You erased them from the server," I said, "but not from everywhere." A flicker of relief crossed his face. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small external drive. His fingers shook around it. "I mirrored everything here," he admitted. "Every visit she tried to hide. That white SUV, late-night drop-offs, side gate entries." I stepped closer. "Do those visits point to one spot?" He swallowed. "An unsold model home on the far edge of the subdivision," he said. "She kept the keys, calls it the reset house. People who argue with her end up there for a night to cool off. She tells the board it's voluntary. What do you see? Deliveries at odd hours, curtains closed all day. People going in with her and not coming out until morning." His voice thinned. "Last week she was on speaker. I heard a kid crying in the background begging to go home. The officer of rules laughed and said, 'Time away from daddy will fix that mouth.' I told myself I misheard. Now your kids are gone." Thunder rolled over the roof and he jumped. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me this tonight?" He stared at the drive like it burned. "Because every time I stay quiet, she pushes farther," he said. "Today I watched you standing there empty-handed while she acted like nothing was wrong. If I keep my head down and something happens to them, that's on me too." He thrust the drive toward me. "Take it," he said. "Give it to the sheriff, whoever. Just don't let the enforcer in crimson bury this." I closed my hand around the evidence, around his confession. The storm hammered the clubhouse, monitors flickered, rain kept pounding, and the system Gail Thornton built cracked from the inside. The conflicted maintenance man had finally picked a side, and with this drive in my pocket, the clipboard queen had just run out of places to hide. I left the clubhouse with the storm at my back and a plastic drive in my pocket. Lightning forked over Willow Ridge as I crossed the lot, each flash throwing the manicured neighborhood into harsh contrast. I had leverage on Gail Thornton now. The woman who operated like a queen in cul-de-sac court had no idea her maintenance man had just handed over a mirror of every last secret she'd tried to wipe. The board chair still thought this was about who controlled the narrative in a neighborhood portal. She hadn't realized it had become a case file in a criminal system she didn't run. I drove. Straight to the sheriff's office, wipers beating across the windshield. Inside, the squad room looked the way it always did. Cluttered boards, ringing phones, burnt coffee. Daniels met me near the doorway, tie loosened. "Tell me you didn't break into anything," he said. I didn't have to, I answered. Your favorite HOA just coughed up its own black box. We went into a side conference room, map on one wall, whiteboard on the other. I set the drive on the table like evidence. Mason cloned the server before the clipboard queen could scrub it, I said. Gate logs, camera archives, vendor routes, and he connected it to an unsold model home she's been using like an unofficial detention center. Daniel's brows shot up. You're telling me the officer of rules has her own off-the-books safe house? Nothing safe about it, I replied. She calls it a reset house. I call it a holding site. My kids may be there, or they were there. He picked up the drive carefully, like it might explode. Then he nodded toward the door. Sit tight, he said. Our tech will image this. If it shows what you think it does, we move tonight. Waiting has never been my strength. Waiting while three faces looped through my mind, Emma's determined stare, Noah's crooked grin, Grace's sleepy smile, felt like torture. I paced the length of the room, watching rain smear across the window. If you've ever had to trust a system that already failed you once, you know what that kind of waiting feels like. And if this hits a nerve, stay with me. Watching someone finally stand up to a bully with a title might be the most satisfying thing you see. The tech slid into the room. You were right, he said to Daniels. Then he looked at me. He kept everything. We've got multiple visits to one property at the edge of Willow Ridge, plus text backups from Thornton scheduling overnight resets. Some of those messages mention your kids by name. My jaw clenched. Timestamps? He turned the screen so we could see. SUV entered at 1437. Camera shut off at 1442. Remotely disabled from the HOA office. Same credentials every time. The enforcer in crimson herself. Daniel's voice hardened. That's enough for a warrant and an emergency entry, he said. We're not treating this as a domestic dispute anymore. He started issuing orders. Units to stage near the subdivision entrance. A plainclothes team to approach the model home from the rear. EMTs on standby. Notification to the DA on call. He looked back at me. You're riding in the second car, he said. You don't go in first, you don't clear rooms, you don't call shots. You're dad tonight, not command. Clear? Clear. It cut, but he was right. The clipboard queen had already taken too much from me. I wasn't about to give her my badge too by crossing a line I couldn't uncross. As we rolled out under, the pounding rain, headlights cutting through sheets of water, one thought drowned out everything else. The tyrant in heels had turned Willow Ridge into a rigged board she thought she could move families across. Now the board was coming for her tonight. We rolled into Willow Ridge with rain pounding to blur the streetlights. The convoy peeled off before the front gate. One cruiser toward the HOA office, another near the clubhouse. Our unmarked SUV slipped along the back road, tires hissing on flooded asphalt. From the back seat I saw the model home Mason described. Lights off, blinds drawn, a too-perfect house at the edge of the subdivision. It looked vacant. It felt wrong. Daniels killed the engine. Units in position, the radio crackled. He looked back at me. You stay behind me. If your kids are inside, my people go first. My throat was too tight to answer, so I just nodded. My hands shook. It wasn't anger. It was every possibility fighting in my head. We moved low along the side yard, boots sucking into wet grass. The storm and the whisper of nylon were the only sounds. Terror clawed up my spine. What if the clipboard queen had moved them again? At the front, a fist hammered the door. Sheriff's office! Open up! No answer. Warrant? Then the crack of the ram, the splinter of wood, the rush of bodies. I hovered at the threshold, every instinct screaming to push through, but I stayed back. The house smelled like paint and stale air. My heart hammered so hard it sounded louder than the storm. Kitchen clear! Garage clear! Each shout ratcheted the tension tighter. If they cleared this place empty, the officer of rules would gain time I couldn't afford. Then I heard it. A small sound. Not from the main floor, but deeper. A muffled hiccup. The kind you try to swallow when you've cried too hard. Basement door, someone called. I moved before Daniels could stop me, following the team down a narrow staircase. The air grew cooler, the smell of dust mixing with something softer. Soap, kid shampoo, familiar scent where it didn't belong. At the bottom, a room weighted with a thin rug, 3 sleeping bags, and a stack of board games that weren't ours. Light from a bare bulb spilled over 3 small figures huddled against the wall. Emma, Noah, Grace. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body remembered rescues and recoveries, but nothing prepared me for seeing my own children in that lineup of the saved. "Daddy!" Emma's voice cracked. That broke whatever was holding me still. I crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to my knees, and pulled them in. They were shaking, but warm. Breathing. Alive. Behind me, deputies worked, photographing the space, logging details. "No restraints," one noted. "Door locked from the outside. No bathroom. Food by the wall." Emma clung to my jacket. "She said you were mad at us," she whispered. "She said the board had to take us away until you learned how to follow the rules." The board chair. The enforcer in crimson who'd smiled at me like she owned the street. The clipboard queen had turned my children into leverage, convinced them I was the problem, not her. "How long?" I asked softly. "Since after lunch," Noah said. "She brought us here in that white car. The lady with the red jacket. She made us promise not to yell." The tyrant in heels had been confident enough in her grip on this neighborhood that she thought she could stash 3 kids in a model home like misdelivered packages. Daniels rested a hand on my shoulder. "EMS is on the way," he said. "We'll get them checked. Then we're talking about charges." Upstairs, thunder rolled again. Out there, somewhere, Gail Thornton still walked around believing she enforced order. Down here, surrounded by evidence she couldn't spin, I held my kids and felt something settle into place. This wasn't just about getting them back. It was making sure the officer of rules never had the chance to do this to anybody's children ever again. We rode with the kids to the hospital, sirens low and steady, the kind of controlled urgency meant to calm more than panic. Emma gripped my hand like it was the only solid thing left. Noah stared at the ambulance ceiling, blinking too fast. Grace tucked herself under my arm, fingers twisted in my shirt. They weren't bleeding, they weren't broken. But, as any responder knows, damage doesn't always show on the surface. I watched their faces while the medic checked vitals, logged the time we'd pulled them from the model home, and wrapped blankets around their shoulders. "Are we in trouble?" Noah whispered. "Not anymore," I said. "The one who did this is..." In the ER, a team pulled me into a consultation room to finish more questions, this time with a recorder on the table. The sheriff's investigator walked me through the timeline again, anchoring each detail: when the enforcer in crimson arrived, when the SUV rolled up, when my kids vanished off camera and reappeared in that basement camp. "This is beyond a custody issue," he said. "The DA's flagging aggravated kidnapping, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. The judge is asking for an emergency hearing first thing in the morning." The clipboard queen thought she could call this temporary supervision. The law didn't see it that way. I left the room and found my kids in a small pediatric bay, stickers on their shirts and juice boxes in their hands. They looked smaller somehow. But when Emma saw me, color returned to her cheeks. "Are we going home?" she asked. "Soon," I told her. "But tomorrow I have to talk to a judge about what the officer of rules did." Grace's eyes widened. "The lady with the red jacket?" "Yeah," I said, "her." As I sat with them, Sheriff Daniels stepped into the doorway. "Wolf," he said, "I need you at the county building at 8. DA wants you there when we present the warrant packet. And there's something else." He handed me a printed email, pulled from the HOA server. It was from Gail Thornton to the board, sent the day before my kids disappeared. "Effective immediately," it read. "The board will pursue stronger corrective measures for non-compliant households. If traditional fines and notices fail, we must be willing to remove disruptive elements temporarily until order is restored." No names, no specifics. Just chilling intent from the tyrant in heels. "She was laying groundwork," I said. "Looks that way," Daniels replied. "The DA thinks it shows premeditation." The next morning, the sky over the county building was clear, washed clean by the storm. Inside, fluorescent lights and beige walls flattened everything inside. The DA's conference room buzzed with low voices, assistants shuffling files, an investigator pinning photos to a board, the model home, the basement, still frames of my kids entering the SUV, and one shot of the board chair holding the door. Judge Langford arrived in shirt sleeves, tie loosened, but expression sharp. He nodded at me once, then turned to the DA. "Walk me through it," he said. They did. My report. Mason's mirrored logs, Jenna's cut-off call, the footage of the enforcer in crimson escorting 3 minors into a car that never returned through the front gate. Every time Gail Thornton's name appeared on screen, approving vendor access, disabling cameras, scheduling reset sessions, the judge's mouth thinned. This was no improvisation, he said at last. This was a system. He signed the stack of papers with deliberate strokes. Execute the arrest warrant immediately, he ordered. Full media transparency. If an HOA president thinks she can convert children into leverage, the public deserves to see exactly where that leads. As his pen left the page, something unclenched in my chest. The tyrant in heels had written her own rules for years. Now someone with more power than her was writing the ones that would finally break her. The courthouse hallway felt like Willow Ridge had emptied into it. Neighbors who used to step off the sidewalk when Gail Thornton walked by were now pressed shoulder to shoulder, watching deputies lead the board chair toward a door she didn't control. News cameras hummed quietly, lenses trained on the woman who'd turned an HOA into her personal throne. I sat in the second row with my kids between Jenna and Mason. Hospital bands still circled their wrists. Across the aisle, residents clutched printouts of the email where the officer of rules wrote about removing disruptive elements. The phrase was highlighted in neon yellow, the polite mask ripped off in ink. Emma tugged my sleeve. "Will she see us?" she whispered. "She will," I said. "And this time, she doesn't get to decide what happens next." The courtroom doors opened. The enforcer in. Crimson stepped in, wearing a tan jumpsuit instead of her usual blazer, shackled at the wrists and ankles. She still tried to walk like the tyrant in heels she'd been, chin high, gaze sweeping the gallery for the old reflexive fear. Instead, she found folded arms and hard eyes. A low, angry murmur rolled through the room. The clipboard queen took her seat at the defense table. She looked back, found me, and tried to piece together that familiar smug half-smile from my driveway. It never made it past her eyes. We stood when Judge Langford entered. When he sat, the bailiff's voice rang out, "The state versus Gail Thornton." Hearing her name in that frame loosened something in my chest I'd been carrying since the bikes disappeared. The prosecutor rose. "Charges," he said, "are aggravated kidnapping, 3 counts, false imprisonment, child endangerment, evidence tampering, and abuse of position in a homeowners association resulting in harm." Each count landed like another block in a wall she couldn't find her way around. Her lawyer tried to wrap it all in HOA language, temporary supervision, behavioral intervention, acting within the scope of her authority as president. The gallery reacted as one, gasps, bitter laughs. Judge Langford's gavel hit once. "This is a criminal court," he said. "Bylaws don't outrank state law." For the first time, the officer of rules looked smaller than the room. The prosecutor called preliminary witnesses so the community could hear the pattern for themselves. Mason walked to the stand like a man walking into a cold wind. His hands shook as he swore in, then steadied when his eyes found my kids. He talked about gate logs Gail ordered him to erase, cameras she told him to shut off, the unsold model home she called the Reset House. He admitted he'd mirrored the server to a private drive because he didn't trust her. When he repeated the line he'd heard over speakerphone, Gail saying, "Time away from Daddy will fix that mouth," the room went silent enough to hear a camera zoom. Jenna followed. Her voice trembled at first as she described calling me from the lobby, the enforcer in crimson pacing outside her office, talking about neutralizing me before I could escalate, the abrupt end to the call when Gail walked back in. Each time Jenna glanced at my kids, her back straightened a little more. Telling the truth in front of everyone was its own kind of rescue. Sitting there, I realized this was the confrontation I'd been moving toward since the afternoon the board chair ground her heel through my daughter's chalk heart. The fines, the threats, the late-night photos, today they weren't isolated grievances whispered over fences. They were a system with one architect, sitting in shackles at the defense table. If you've ever known in your gut that someone with a title was abusing it and wondered if they'd ever have to answer, this was that. All line in the sand. At last, Judge Langford turned to her. "Ms. Thornton," he said, "how do you plead?" For the first time, the tyrant in heels had nothing to hide behind but her own voice. Her jaw tightened. Her gaze flicked from the packed gallery to my children, then back to the bench. "I am not guilty," Gail Thornton said. The words didn't change what the room had just heard. They only marked the start of the next phase, where the clipboard queen's entire reign would be taken apart, piece by piece, in public view. The trial didn't happen in one day. It stretched over weeks of testimony and cross-examination, every abuse dragged into the light. But the moment that mattered most came months later. In that same courtroom, with my kids on the bench beside me and Gail Thornton shackled at the defense table, the prosecutor laid out everything the board chair tried to bury: mirrored gate logs, disabled cameras, emails about removing disruptive elements, messages scheduling nights at the reset house. The jury watched the footage of my children being steered toward that SUV, while the enforcer in crimson held the door. They heard Mason admit how the officer of rules ordered him to erase entries and how he secretly copied everything. They heard my kids in small, shaking voices repeat how the clipboard queen said the board had to retrain our family. When the jury came back, nobody in Willow Ridge moved. Emma's fingers threaded through mine. Noah's foot bounced. Grace pressed her cheek into my arm. Across the aisle, neighbors who used to flinch when the tyrant in heels walked past now faced her in silence. The foreman stood. On the charge of aggravated kidnapping, count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Each word landed like another lock turning on a cell door. False imprisonment, guilty. Child endangerment, guilty. Abuse of position, guilty. Color drained from Gail Thornton's face. For once, there was no lecture about standards, no tight smile, no appeal to bylaws. Just a woman who'd treated children like leverage, realizing the rules she wrote didn't apply here. Judge Langford dismissed the jury. Given the public interest and the questions of HOA authority raised by this case, he said, sentencing will be broadcast live. He looked at her and didn't soften the edges. Ms. Thornton, you claimed that as HOA president, you had the right to remove children from their home to restore order. You hid behind titles, manipulated volunteers, falsified records, and built a private system where fear did your work. That isn't community leadership. That's calculated cruelty. These children weren't disruptive elements, he went on. They were members of this community and minors under the protection of laws you chose to ignore. If this court treated your conduct like a misunderstanding, it would invite every petty tyrant with a clipboard to think they could do the us. Same. He leaned back, voice steady. On the counts of aggravated kidnapping, this court sentences you to life in prison without possibility of parole on the primary count. The remaining counts will run concurrently. You are barred from holding any position of authority in this state. There it was, a life sentence, delivered level and live. Deputies moved in. The former board chair rose in chains. As the enforcer in crimson shuffled toward the side door, she glanced back, maybe hoping to find the old fear she used to command. All she saw were 3 kids holding on to their father and a gallery of neighbors who finally realized she'd never been bigger than them at all. In the months that followed, Willow Ridge voted to dissolve the old board. A new committee formed with clear limits, open books, and one rule: no single person could ever control the cameras, the records, or the narrative again. The reset house became an after-school space with a plaque promising no child would be taken again. At night, when my kids dozed off in the rooms their mom once painted, I'd stand in the hallway and listen to them breathe. I couldn't erase the hours they spent in that basement. But I could keep the promise I made by making sure what happened on our cul-de-sac changed more than just our own driveway. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Each word landed like another lock turning on a cell door. False imprisonment, guilty. Child endangerment, guilty. Abuse of position, guilty. Color drained from Gail Thornton's face. For once, there was no lecture about standards, no tight smile, no appeal to bylaws. Just a woman who'd treated children like leverage, realizing the rules she wrote didn't apply here. Judge Langford dismissed the jury. Given the public interest and the questions of HOA authority raised by this case, he said, sentencing will be broadcast live. He looked at her and didn't soften the edges. Ms. Thornton, you claimed that as HOA president, you had the right to remove children from their home to restore order. You hid behind titles, manipulated volunteers, falsified records, and built a private system where fear did your work. That isn't community leadership. That's calculated cruelty. These children weren't disruptive elements, he went on. They were members of this community and minors under the protection of laws you chose to ignore. If this court treated your conduct like a misunderstanding, it would invite every petty tyrant with a clipboard to think they could do the us. Same, he leaned back, voice steady. On the counts of aggravated kidnapping, this court sentences you to life in prison without possibility of parole on the primary count. The remaining counts will run concurrently. You are barred from holding any position of authority in this state. There it was, a life sentence, delivered level and live. Deputies moved in. The former board chair rose in chains. As the enforcer in crimson shuffled toward the side door, she glanced back, maybe hoping to find the old fear she used to command. All she saw were 3 kids holding on to their father and a gallery of neighbors who finally realized she'd never been bigger than them at all. In the months that followed, Willow Ridge voted to dissolve the old board. A new committee formed with clear limits, open books, and one rule: no single person could ever control the cameras, the records, or the narrative again. The Reset House became an after-school space with a plaque promising no child would be taken again. At night, when my kids dozed off in the rooms their mom once painted, I'd stand in the hallway and listen to them breathe. I couldn't erase the hours they spent in that basement. But I could keep the promise I made by making sure what happened on our cul-de-sac changed more than just our own driveway. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.